At 2:47 p.m. on November 23, 2023, while my wife Margaret's body lay in her mahogany coffin surrounded by white roses she had grown in our garden for 37 years, my 3 children huddled in the corner of Pemberton Funeral Home arguing about who would get her jewelry collection worth $4.7 million. They didn't notice the recording app on my phone capturing every word as my eldest son Michael said, "Dad's next anyway, probably within a year. We should plan now." Those 11 words, spoken while his mother's body was still warm, while her favorite Chopin nocturne played softly in the background, while her friends wept genuine tears just 20 feet away, changed everything. The man they thought was a grieving, broken 68-year-old widower who would sign whatever they put in front of him was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. My name is James Winchester, and this is the story of how I made my children pay $73 million for their greed, exposed their conspiracy at my wife's memorial service in front of 500 witnesses, and disappeared with everything they thought they deserved while they rot in federal prison. I met Margaret Elizabeth Hartley on September 15, 1975, at 7:23 p.m. at a charity auction in the Copley Plaza Hotel's Grand Ballroom in Boston. She was 22 years old, fresh out of Wellesley College with a degree in art history and a minor in French literature, wearing a navy blue Halston dress that made her green eyes sparkle like emeralds under the crystal chandeliers. Her auburn hair was pinned up with her grandmother's pearl clips, and she bid with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what everything was worth. I was 24, just starting my investment firm, Winchester Capital Management, with $50,000 borrowed from my father at 12% interest and dreams bigger than my bank account or business experience. She outbid me on a Monet sketch, Water Lilies at Twilight, raising her paddle at $15,000 when my limit was $12,000. Then she turned to me with a smile that stopped my heart and offered to share it if I took her to dinner. That dinner at La Cober lasted until 3:17 a.m. We talked about everything: her passion for Renaissance art, particularly Botticelli's use of tempera, my plans to revolutionize private equity by focusing on distressed assets, our shared love of sailing the Charles River at dawn, and our dreams of building something meaningful together. 6 months later, on March 15, 1976, at the same auction house, during the Spring Gala, I proposed to her with a 3.2-carat emerald ring that matched her eyes. She said yes before I could finish the question, and the entire room of Boston's elite applauded. Our wedding was on June 18, 1976, at Trinity Church in Copley Square. Margaret walked down the aisle to box air on the G string, played by the Boston Symphony Orchestra's first chair violin, whom she had personally convinced to perform. Her dress was her mother's, altered with French lace she'd bought on our engagement trip to Paris. My hands shook as I placed the ring on her finger, and I forgot my vows completely, finally just saying, "Margaret, you make me want to be worthy of you," which made her cry and became our private phrase for the next 47 years. The reception was at her parents' estate in Wellesley, with Japanese lanterns in the garden and her father's jazz quartet playing until sunrise. We danced to The Way You Look Tonight by Frank Sinatra, and she whispered, "James, promise me we'll always dance, even when the music stops." I promised. I kept that promise every Sunday until she couldn't stand anymore. We built our life methodically, intentionally, like architects of meaning rather than just wealth. The first decade was about establishing my firm while Margaret curated art collections for Boston's elite families, including the Cabots, Lodges, and Saltonstalls. She had an extraordinary eye for undiscovered talent, once buying a series of paintings from an unknown artist named Jackson Bellworth for $10,000 that later sold at Sotheby's for $3.2 million. She found him painting portraits in Quincy Market for tourist money, recognized his genius, and set him up with gallery shows that launched his career. By 1985, Winchester Capital managed $500 million in assets across 17 funds. By 1995, it was $5 billion with offices in Boston, New York, London, and Hong Kong. Margaret stood beside me through 18-hour workdays, 3 recessions that almost destroyed us, 2 hostile takeover attempts by Morgan Stanley, and countless nights when I questioned if the sacrifice was worth it. She always said the same thing while making me tea at 2 a.m. "James, we're not building wealth, we're building legacy. Money is just the tool, not the purpose. Our children arrived in careful succession, each pregnancy planned around market cycles and Margaret's art exhibitions. Michael James Winchester was born on June 8, 1978, at 4:47 a.m. during the worst thunderstorm Boston had seen in decades. The power went out at Mass General just as he crowned, and he was delivered by candlelight. Even as a baby, he was calculating, watching everything with dark eyes that seemed to evaluate the world's worth. The nurse said she'd never seen a newborn who looked so serious. Jennifer Margaret Winchester followed on September 22, 1980, born at exactly midnight, as if she couldn't decide which day would give her more advantage. The doctor joked that she was already negotiating her entrance. David Christopher Winchester completed our family on February 14, 1983, Valentine's Day, though he would grow to show the least heart of all three. He was born silent, not crying until the nurse practically forced it, as if he was already keeping his cards close. I remember teaching them about money at our mahogany dining table that had belonged to Margaret's great-grandfather, a shipping magnate who built his fortune honestly. Michael was 12, Jennifer 10, David 7. I placed $100 in singles on the table, fanned out like a deck of cards. "This," I said, "represents everything our family has. How should we use it?" Michael immediately grabbed for it, counting it twice, saying we should invest it all in tech stocks. Jennifer wanted to divide it equally among us 5. David asked how much more was in the bank and if this was a test. Even then, I should have seen the warning signs. Margaret noticed, though. That night, as we lay in bed in our Beacon Hill townhouse, she said, "They love money more than meaning, James. We need to teach them differently." The moonlight through our bedroom window caught the worry in her eyes. We tried everything. God, how we tried. Family dinners every Sunday at 6 p.m. sharp where phones were banned and we discussed art, philosophy, literature, anything but business. Margaret would quiz them on impressionist painters or romantic poets. I'd tell stories about my grandfather who gave away half his fortune during the Depression. Summers in our Martha's Vineyard house without television, just books and sailing and conversation around the fire pit. Margaret insisted each child volunteer at homeless shelters on Saturdays, work minimum wage jobs during high school, understand what real struggle looked like. Michael lasted 2 weeks at McDonald's before quitting, claiming it was beneath his potential. Jennifer made it a month at Target, then falsified her time card to show more hours. David never showed up to his first shift at the grocery store, later claiming he was exploring more efficient uses of his time. College changed them completely, transformed them into strangers who shared our DNA but not our values. Michael went to Wharton, joined Phi Kappa Psi, the most exclusive fraternity, and came back junior year talking about leveraging relationships and maximizing personal equity. He actually used the phrase human capital to describe our gardener, Eduardo, who'd worked for us 20 years. Jennifer chose Yale, majored in economics with a minor in statistics, and returned with spreadsheets analyzing our family's net worth, including projections of Margaret's and my life expectancy. She'd calculated the exact date when inheriting would be optimal from a tax perspective. David picked Harvard Business School after Princeton undergrad, graduated summa cum laude, and immediately asked for his share of the family fortune to start his own hedge fund, presenting a 47-slide PowerPoint on why early inheritance made financial sense. Margaret cried that night, real sobbing I'd only heard twice before, when her father died and when she miscarried between Jennifer and David. "We gave them everything," she said, "except what mattered." The cancer diagnosis came on August 15, 2023, a Tuesday that started like any other. Margaret had made her special blueberry pancakes, the ones with lemon zest she learned from her grandmother. She'd been tired lately, but we attributed it to planning the annual Hartley Foundation Gala she organized every September for underprivileged artists. Dr. Morrison's words hit like physical blows. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, metastasized to the liver, 3 to 6 months if we were lucky, weeks if we weren't. Margaret held my hand and asked about treatment options with the same calm she'd shown when our house burned down in 1992, when when I lost $200 million in the 2008 crash, when her father died in her arms from a stroke. But I saw the fear in her eyes when she asked, "What about the children? Will they be all right without me?" I lied and said yes. I called them that evening at exactly 6 p.m., our traditional dinner time. Michael was in Shanghai closing a deal to acquire a textile company and destroy it for parts. Jennifer was in London at a derivatives conference, probably inside trading based on what I'd later discover. David was in Silicon Valley meeting investors for his fund, lying about returns based on the fraudulent documents I'd eventually uncover. Each responded the same way, "How bad is it?" followed immediately by "Have you updated the will?" Not "How is mom?" Not "What does she need?" Not "We're coming home." Just concerns about inheritance. Margaret heard every call on speaker. She didn't cry. She just said quietly, "Now we know who they really are." The next 2 months were a masterclass in revealing character. Michael visited twice, both times bringing legal documents, just in case mom wants to get affairs in order, including a power of attorney that would have given him control of everything. Jennifer came 3 times, each visit shorter than the last, always with excuses about urgent meetings that I later learned were spa appointments and shopping trips. David managed 4 visits, spending most of them on his phone, occasionally looking up to ask if we'd considered tax-efficient wealth transfer strategies, and suggesting we establish a family-limited partnership before the event, as he called Margaret's death. Meanwhile, Rosa Guadalupe Hernandez, a 58-year-old immigrant from Guatemala who'd been Margaret's nurse for just 3 weeks, held her hand through chemotherapy that made her vomit blood, read her favorite Keats and Wordsworth poems in accented English, and cried genuine tears when the pain got too bad for even morphine to handle. On October 20th, 2023, Margaret asked to see the children one last time. She could barely speak above a whisper, weighed 87 pounds, and hadn't eaten solid food in 9 days. They all had excuses. Michael's Shanghai deal couldn't wait. He stood to make $3 million in commission. Jennifer had a crucial presentation to Goldman Sachs that was career-defining. David was launching his fund with a party at the St. Regis that cost $75,000. Margaret looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said, "Promise me something, James. Promise me you'll show them who they really are. Promise me you'll teach them the lesson we failed to teach." I promised on her mother's Bible that she kept by her bedside. She died at 3:33 a.m. on November 18, 2023, holding my hand and roses, whispering about the garden she'd never see bloom again, the grandchildren she'd never teach to paint, the dance we'd never finish. The funeral was scheduled for November 23rd at 2 p.m. The children arrived that morning on separate flights, each in first class, each expensing it to their companies. Their first questions weren't about the service arrangements or my well-being. Michael wanted to know if I'd brought the will and if we could expedite the reading. Jennifer asked about the safety deposit box keys and whether I'd done an inventory of Margaret's jewelry. David inquired about passwords to the investment accounts and suggested we hire an estate sale company to liquidate non-essential assets quickly. I told them we'd discuss everything after we buried their mother. They seemed annoyed by the delay, checking their watches and phones constantly. Pemberton Funeral Home had never seen such an elegant service. Margaret had planned every detail in a leather journal months before, down to the specific shade of white for the roses. Cloud white, not Snow White, James, there's a difference. She'd selected music by the Boston Symphony Quartet she'd supported for years, readings from Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, and Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey, her favorite poems that she'd memorized in college. 300 people came to pay respects, colleagues from my firm who'd become family, artists she'd mentored including 2 MacArthur Fellows, charity board members from the Museum of Fine Arts, childhood friends from Wellesley who'd known her since kindergarten. The children sat in the front row, checking their phones every few minutes. Michael actually took a call during the opening prayer, stepping out with an apologetic gesture that fooled no one. Father Morrison, who'd married us and baptized all 3 children, gave a beautiful eulogy about Margaret's grace, her generosity, her way of finding beauty in broken things and helping them heal. He told the story of how she'd paid for his sister's cancer treatment anonymously, how he'd only discovered it was her after finding a thank you card in her desk. I spoke about our 47 years together, how she'd made me a better man, how her love was the only wealth that ever mattered. I told the story of our first dance, our last dance in her hospital room, to our wedding song playing on my phone, how even dying she was more concerned about my loneliness than her pain. Michael looked at his watch 7 times during my 12-minute speech. Jennifer typed on her phone, probably checking market futures. David yawned twice, not even trying to cover it. When Margaret's best friend, Eleanor Cabot, broke down crying during her speech about their 60-year friendship that started in kindergarten, Jennifer whispered to Michael, loud enough for 3 rows to hear, "How much longer is this going to take?" Then came the moment that changed everything. At 2:47 p.m., while people were filing past the coffin to pay final respects, while Margaret's favorite Chopin nocturne in E-flat major played softly, while her cousin from Ireland was placing a clado ring in her hands, I heard voices from the corner where my children had gathered near the memorial guest book. I moved closer, activating my phone's recording app out of habit from business meetings where I'd learned to document everything. What I heard destroyed the last vestige of paternal love I'd held onto despite years of disappointment. "The house alone is worth $30 million, Michael was saying, his voice carrying the same tone he used for acquisition targets. Prime Beacon Hill real estate, 6 bedrooms, original federal architecture. We could have it on the market by January. Don't forget the art collection," Jennifer added, scrolling through her phone. "The Monet sketch alone is worth $8 million now. The 3 Picasso drawings, maybe $12 million. The Rothko in the study, at least $15 million. I've already contacted Christie's about an appraisal. Plus the Martha's Vineyard estate," David chimed in. 40 acres of prime waterfront, worth at least $25 million. More if we subdivide and develop it. "There's also the investment portfolio," Michael continued. I got a look at the last statement. About $200 million in securities, another $50 million in bonds, plus the private equity holdings. "Don't forget the offshore accounts," Jennifer added with a smirk. "Dad thinks we don't know about the Cayman Islands Trust, but I have a friend at his bank. There's at least another $30 million there, maybe more." "We need to move fast," David insisted, checking his Rolex, a gift from Margaret for his Harvard graduation. "Dad's lost without Mom. He'll probably stroke out within a year, 18 months max. We should get power of attorney now while he's vulnerable, grieving, not thinking clearly." "I already talked to Richardson," Michael said, referring to Lawrence Richardson, a lawyer who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. "He says if we can document any signs of confusion or depression, we can make a case for diminished capacity. One psychiatric evaluation from the right doctor, and we control everything." "The memorial dinner tonight," Jennifer suggested, her voice cold as winter. "We'll bring up the will, push him on specifics. If he gets emotional or confused, I'll record it. Evidence for later. Richardson says emotional instability plus his age equals an easy case." "God, this is taking forever," David muttered, looking at Margaret's coffin with undisguised impatience. "How long do we have to pretend to be sad? My flight's at 9, and I need to prep for tomorrow's investor meeting." "Just a few more hours of theater," Jennifer replied. "Smile, look sad, maybe squeeze out a tear if you can manage it." "Dad's next anyway," Michael said with a shrug that I could hear in his voice. "Probably within a year. We should plan now. I'm thinking we establish a family trust with us as trustees, move the assets before he dies to avoid estate taxes." "Already ahead of you," David said. "I've got the trust documents drafted. We just need his signature. Tonight, when he's drunk and emotional, we get it." "What about Rosa?" Jennifer asked. "Mom promised her something in writing. I saw a note." "Fuck Rosa," Michael said, the vulgarity sharp in the funeral home's sacred space. "She's just the help. We give her 10 grand to go away, maybe 20 if she makes noise. She's illegal anyway, isn't she? I think so, David said. We could always threaten to call IC if she causes problems. They laughed. They actually laughed, a sound that cut through the Chopin and the weeping and the whispered prayers like a blade through silk. They laughed while their mother's body lay 30 feet away, while her friends grieved, while I stood frozen, my phone recording every damning word. I stood there for another full minute, my phone recording, my heart shattering into pieces Margaret would never help me reassemble. These weren't my children. These were vultures who happened to share my DNA, predators who saw their mother's death as a business opportunity. But I remembered Margaret's last request: show them who they really are. I would do more than that. I would destroy them completely, utterly, with the kind of precision I'd use to dismantle companies worth billions. 45 years in private equity had taught me patience, strategy, and most importantly, how to identify an enemy's weakness and exploit it without mercy. My children had just declared war on a man who'd hostile takeover, acquired 3 Fortune 500 companies before breakfast, and crushed men far more formidable than 3 trust fund brats who'd never earned an honest dollar. That evening, we held the memorial dinner at the Four Seasons, in the Bristol Lounge where Margaret and I had celebrated every anniversary. 50 close friends and family members gathered in the private dining room she'd loved, with its view of the public garden where we'd walked every Sunday for decades, feeding the ducks and planning our future. The children sat together at my table, barely concealing their impatience as course after course arrived. Margaret's favorite dishes that she'd never eat again: oysters from Duxbury, butternut squash soup with sage, duck confit with cherry reduction, chocolate soufflé with Grand Marnier. They picked at their food, checking phones, whispering about things that had nothing to do with their mother. Finally, as dessert was served, Michael made his move. "Dad," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, clearly wanting witnesses, "we should discuss Mom's wishes about the estate. It's what she would have wanted: clarity, efficiency, no confusion." Several guests looked uncomfortable. This was neither the time nor place, but Michael pressed on with the determination of a shark smelling blood. She would want us to handle things quickly, efficiently. Did she leave specific instructions? We should honor them immediately. I let my voice crack slightly, a performance worthy of Olivier. "Your mother. She had very specific wishes, yes. Very specific." Jennifer leaned forward eagerly, her eyes glinting with greed. "What kind of wishes? Did she update things recently? We should know, to honor them properly." "She wanted to make sure everyone was taken care of," I said, which was true, though not in the way they imagined. "Of course," David jumped in, trying to sound mournful. "Family comes first. When can we review the will? We want to ensure her wishes are executed perfectly." "Tomorrow," I said, my voice hollow. "My office, 10 a.m. Bring your spouses." Margaret insisted everyone be present. They exchanged satisfied glances, already calculating their shares, dividing up Margaret's life like hyenas over a carcass. They didn't notice me texting under the table, my fingers moving with practiced ease. Thomas Brennan, my private investigator. James Morrison, my lawyer. Sandra Chun, my forensic accountant. Roberto Silva, my head of security. The War Council was assembled. The battle would begin at dawn. That night, alone in the house that still smelled like Margaret's lavender perfume, that still held her presence in every shadow, I went to work. First, I reviewed the recording from the funeral 17 times. Crystal clear, every damning word captured with perfect fidelity. Then I opened my laptop and began executing the plan I'd formulated during dinner, a plan that would make corporate raids look like kindergarten games. I started with forensic accounting. Sandra Chun had worked for the FBI for 15 years before I hired her to investigate acquisition targets. I gave her unlimited resources and simple instructions: find everything. Every hidden debt, every shady deal, every skeleton in my children's financial closets. "How deep?" she asked. "Marianas Trench deep," I replied. I want to know every dollar they've ever touched, every lie they've ever told, every crime they've ever contemplated. Next, I called James Morrison, senior partner at Morrison, Klein & Associates, the law firm that had handled my affairs for 3 decades. Jim, I said, I need to restructure everything by morning. Every asset, every account, every trust. Make me a ghost. He didn't ask why. In our world, sudden restructuring meant either opportunity or threat, and he knew I didn't make rash decisions. Consider it done, he said. I'll have the team here all night. Thomas Brennan, my investigator, was already working. A former FBI financial crime specialist who'd put away 3 senators and a Federal Reserve Board member, he had contacts everywhere that mattered. I need complete profiles, I told him. Financial, personal, criminal. Every affair, every bribe, every moment of weakness. I want to know what they dream about and what keeps them awake at night. By 3 a.m., the preliminary reports started coming in, each one more damning than the last. Michael, my eldest, the one who'd grabbed for money at that childhood dinner table, was drowning in debt that would have made Greece blush. His lifestyle exceeded his income by 400%. He owed $3.2 million to various creditors, had taken loans against his expected inheritance at 18% interest, and had been embezzling from his company, Titan Acquisitions, for 2 years. The FBI had been building a case. They just needed one more piece of evidence to move. He'd also been selling insider information to a Chinese firm, a federal offense worth 20 years. Jennifer, my Yale-educated daughter, had been trading on insider information for 7 years, using details she'd gleaned from eavesdropping on my calls, hiding in my study while I worked, even installing spyware on my computer that she thought I didn't know about. The SEC had flagged 17 suspicious patterns, but hadn't connected them to her yet. She'd made $8 million illegally and hidden it in shell companies in Malta and Cyprus. Her husband, Marcus, didn't know about the insider trading. He also didn't know about her affair with her business partner, Richard Lowenstein, documented in emails and hotel receipts my investigator recovered. She'd been paying for the affair with money embezzled from their joint accounts, technically making Marcus a victim of fraud. David, my Harvard-graduated youngest, had been running a Ponzi scheme through his hedge fund, Prometheus Capital, using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors while siphoning millions for himself. He'd convinced 13 of my friends to invest, trading on the Winchester name. The scheme was 3 months from collapse. He needed $50 million by January or the entire pyramid would crumble. When it did, he'd face 20 years in federal prison, and every investor would lose everything. He'd also been falsifying tax returns for 5 years, an additional felony worth 10 years. But the best part, the part that made me smile despite everything, was what they'd done to each other. Michael had been secretly recording Jennifer's calls, planning to blackmail her. Jennifer had hired a private investigator to follow David, gathering evidence of his cocaine habit. David had been undermining Michael's deals, feeding information to competitors. They weren't just criminals. They were criminals who would devour each other given the chance. By dawn, I had everything I needed. But information without strategy is just gossip. I needed to deploy this intelligence with surgical precision, maximum impact, and perfect timing. Margaret had always said I played chess while others played checkers. This would be my masterpiece, my symphony of destruction, my love letter to the woman who deserved better children. At exactly 10 a.m. on November 24th, my children arrived at my office in the Hancock Tower, 60 floors above Boston, with views that stretched to the Atlantic. They brought their spouses, Michael's wife Patricia, a former model from Belarus who'd married him for money she thought he had, Jennifer's husband Marcus, a decent pediatrician who deserved better, David's wife Sarah, pregnant with their first child, innocent of her husband's crimes, a kindergarten teacher who still believed in human goodness. They all sat around the conference table where I'd orchestrated billion-dollar deals, where I'd built an empire they thought they'd inherit, unaware they were about to become the acquisition, a hostile one. Before we discuss the will, I began, pouring myself coffee with steady hands, I want to share something Margaret recorded for you." I pressed play on my laptop. But instead of Margaret's voice, they heard their own conversation from the funeral. The blood drained from their faces as their words filled the room. "Dad's next anyway, probably within a year. We should plan now. How long do we have to pretend to be sad? We can make a case for diminished capacity. Fuck Rosa. She's just the help." Patricia gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Marcus stood up, staring at Jennifer in horror. Sarah started crying, her hands protective over her pregnant belly. My children, however, tried to recover, their faces cycling through surprise, indignation, and finally, attempted innocence. "Dad, that's taken out of context," Michael started, his voice cracking. "Shut up," I said quietly, my voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in boardrooms. "Just shut up and listen. You spoke. Now it's my turn." I pulled out 3 folders, each one thick as a phone book, each one containing the complete destruction of a life built on lies. "Michael, inside you'll find documentation of your embezzlement from Titan Acquisitions, $3.2 million over 2 years. The FBI will arrest you Monday at 9 a.m. unless you sign this confession and agree to testify against your co-conspirators, including your Chinese contacts. You'll get 5 years instead of 20. Minimum security instead of maximum. You'll serve 3 with good behavior." His hands shook as he opened the folder, seeing photocopies of forged documents, altered accounts, emails discussing bribes. Patricia looked at the documents over his shoulder, her face transforming from confusion to rage. "You told me we were rich," she hissed in accented English. "You told me your father would give us $50 million. Jennifer," I continued, sliding the second folder across the mahogany table, "your folder contains every insider trade from the last 7 years. 43 separate violations. The SEC will offer you a deal, $8 million in fines, lifetime ban from trading, but no jail time if you cooperate fully. Also included are receipts from the Ritz-Carlton, where you meet Richard every Tuesday afternoon while telling Marcus you're at yoga." Marcus took the folder from Jennifer's numb hands, reading with increasing disbelief. His face crumbled as he saw hotel receipts, credit card statements, text messages. "You told me you were faithful," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "You told me we were building our fortune honestly. You told me you loved me." "David," I said, turning to my youngest, the Valentine baby who'd grown up heartless, "your Ponzi scheme has exactly 72 hours before imploding. Your investors, including my friends who trusted you because of our name, will lose everything, $127 million in total. Unless, of course, someone covers their investments and you confess before they discover it themselves. Prison time, 3 years instead of 20. Your cocaine dealer, by the way, is actually an undercover DEA agent. They've been building a case for 6 months." Sarah stood up, shaking, holding her belly. "David, what is he talking about? What did you do? We're having a baby. How could you risk our child's future?" "But here's the interesting part," I said, standing and walking to the window overlooking the city Margaret and I had loved, where we'd built our life stone by stone. "Your mother knew. She knew everything." I pulled out Margaret's journal, leather-bound, filled with her elegant handwriting that looked like calligraphy. Rosa had given it to me that morning, crying as she handed it over. "Mrs. Margaret, she write every day," Rosa had said. "She want you to see. She want them to know she knew." I opened to a page dated October 15th and read aloud, "My children are strangers who share my blood but not my values. They've become everything James and I tried to prevent, greedy, heartless, seeing people as transactions and life as a balance sheet. James has built an empire, but we failed to build character in those meant to inherit it. I've asked him to give them nothing but the truth about themselves. Let them earn their redemption or reveal their damnation." I turned to October 20th, 3 days before she died. Michael visited today. He brought papers for me to sign, thinking I was too weak to read them. They would have given him control of my personal accounts, $20 million. I pretended to sleep. He went through my jewelry box while I lay there, taking photos for appraisal. My son is a grave robber who couldn't wait for the grave. October 21st, Jennifer called. She asked about my medication schedule, specifically what would make me comfortable. She wasn't concerned about my pain. She wanted to know what would make me compliant. My daughter sees me as an obstacle to her inheritance. October 22nd, David didn't come. He sent an email asking for my signature on investment documents. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't even say goodbye. My youngest son has no heart at all. Now, I said, closing the journal with reverence, let's discuss the will. I pulled out the original document, embossed with our lawyer's seal, wrapped in blue legal ribbon. The original will, written 10 years ago when we still had hope for you, divided everything equally among you three. Approximately $73,847,293.46 each after taxes, plus properties, art, and personal effects. Their eyes lit up despite everything, that involuntary greed reflex they couldn't control, like addicts seeing their drug of choice. However, I continued, pulling out a second document, Margaret and I updated it on October 20th, 3 days before she died, with her oncologist and 2 psychiatrists present to verify her mental competence. Would you like to hear the new terms? They nodded, unable to speak, their spouses leaning forward. To Michael James Winchester, $1, representing the value you placed on your mother's final days. To Jennifer Margaret Winchester, $1, representing the depth of your emotional investment in this family. To David Christopher Winchester, $1, representing the authenticity of your grief. The silence was absolute, the kind that comes before explosions. Then Michael erupted, standing so fast his chair fell backward. You can't do this. We'll contest it. No court will uphold. Actually, they will, said a voice from the doorway. James Morrison entered with 2 associates, all carrying thick briefcases. The will is ironclad. Your father and Margaret included video testimony lasting 3 hours, psychiatric evaluations from Harvard Medical School proving mental competence, and extensive documentation of their reasoning. Any contest will fail and trigger the publicity clause. The what? Jennifer asked, her voice hollow, all her Yale confidence evaporated. Morrison smiled coldly, the smile of a lawyer about to destroy someone legally. If you contest, all evidence of your crimes becomes public immediately. The FBI, SEC, and investor lawsuits will follow within hours. Also, we've prepared a press release detailing everything, including your funeral conversation. The Boston Globe has already expressed interest. Where's the money going? David demanded, his Harvard MBA brain still calculating. Where's our inheritance? I pulled out a press release dated for Monday, printed on Winchester capital letterhead. The Margaret Hartley Winchester Foundation for Underprivileged Artists. Every penny except what I need to live on. The announcement includes a detailed explanation of why our children won't inherit, including excerpts from Margaret's journal and your funeral conversation. The Globe will run it front page. The New York Times wants it for their wealth section. The Wall Street Journal is doing a feature on When Wealth Corrupts, a Family Tragedy. You're bluffing, Michael said desperately. You wouldn't destroy your own children. Mom wouldn't want this. Your mother specifically requested this, Morrison interjected. I have video of her dictating these exact terms, including the dollar amounts and the requirement to make everything public if contested. You recorded Mom dying? Jennifer gasped. I recorded Mom living, I corrected. Living with the knowledge that her children were vultures. Living with dignity despite your abandonment. Living with grace you'll never understand. Patricia had already started calculating. Michael, sign it. Sign it now, or I'm filing for divorce Monday and taking everything you haven't already lost. I'll testify against you too. I know about the Chinese money." Marcus was staring at Jennifer with disgust. Tuesday afternoons. I rearranged my surgery schedule so we could have lunch together on Tuesdays. You were with him. Sarah was sobbing. "How could you do this, David? We're having a baby. How could you risk our child's future? My students' parents invested with you. They'll lose their homes." "But," I said, raising my hand for silence, "because your mother had more mercy than you deserved, you have one alternative." I placed 3 new documents on the table, each one 50 pages thick. "Sign these. Confess to your crimes, accept the reduced sentences I've negotiated, and agree to never contest the will. In exchange, I'll create a trust that will pay each of you $50,000 annually, enough to live modestly but not enough to fuel your greed. Your spouses, who are innocent victims of your deception, will receive $1 million each to restart their lives. Sarah, there's an additional trust for your child's education through graduate school." "This is extortion," Jennifer hissed, her affair-flushed face now pale. "No," Marcus said quietly, "this is justice." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Winchester, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about Mrs. Winchester, and I'm sorry about them. She was always kind to me. She remembered my mother's birthday, sent flowers. She was more family to me than Jennifer ever was." "I'll sign," Patricia announced. "Michael, you sign too, or I call the FBI myself. I know where you hide the records." "Sarah." David looked at his pregnant wife pleadingly. "Sign it," she said coldly. "Sign it, and then we're going to therapy. Years of it. And you're going to work at my school, teaching kids about financial literacy and honesty for free until you remember how to be human." Within an hour, all 3 children had signed. They left broken, humiliated, their empires of greed collapsed, their spouses either planning divorce or demanding transformation. The spouses stayed behind, each wanting to talk. "Mr. Winchester," Patricia said, her accent thick with emotion, "I know I married Michael for the wrong reasons, but I've grown to respect you and Margaret. She taught me about art, about beauty beyond price tags. Is there anything I can do?" "Divorce him," I said simply. "Take the $1 million, start fresh, find someone who values love over money." "And Patricia? Margaret left you something." I handed her a small box. Inside was a Cartier watch Margaret had worn on our wedding day. "She wanted you to have this. She said you had good taste corrupted by bad influence." Marcus shook my hand, his grip firm despite his tears. "Margaret was an extraordinary woman. Jennifer never deserved her. Never deserved you either. If you need anything, my door is always open." Sarah hugged me, crying into my shoulder. "Please, will you be part of your grandchild's life? I want them to know their grandfather, the real one, not the image David created. I want them to know about Margaret." "Of course," I said, and meant it. "Margaret would have loved to be a grandmother. I'll tell your child everything about her, the good parts, the parts worth inheriting." The next 72 hours unfolded exactly as planned. Monday morning at 9:17 a.m., the FBI arrested Michael at his office in front of his entire staff. The perp walk was on every news channel by noon. They'd waited for the morning meeting, maximum humiliation. Jennifer's insider trading made the Wall Street Journal's front page with the headline "Winchester Heiress Falls from Grace. Insider Trading Scandal Rocks Boston Elite." David's confession saved his investors, but destroyed his reputation permanently. The financial press had a field day. Winchester heirs lose $73 million fortune to greed. How to lose $200 million in 72 hours. The fall of American aristocracy. A Winchester tragedy. But I wasn't done. Phase 2 began at Margaret's memorial service on December 1st, held at the Museum of Fine Arts in the gallery she'd endowed. 500 people attended, including everyone who'd ever invested with my children, everyone they'd cheated, everyone they dismissed as beneath them. The mayor came. The governor sent regards. The children were required to attend as part of their plea agreements, sitting in the back row like pariahs. I gave the eulogy, but not the one they expected. Margaret's greatest sorrow, I began, standing before Monet's water lilies, which she'd loved, was not her cancer. It was watching our children choose greed over grace, wealth over wisdom, money over meaning. I detailed their crimes, their abandonment, their conspiracy at her funeral. The recording played on speakers throughout the museum, their voices echoing off marble walls. Several investors confronted David afterward. Former friends turned their backs on Michael. Jennifer's Yale Alumni Association revoked her membership that afternoon by emergency vote. But Margaret believed in redemption, I continued. She believed broken things could be repaired, that people could change. So while our children have lost their inheritance, they haven't lost their chance at redemption. The Margaret Hartley Winchester Foundation will pay for their therapy, their rehabilitation, their journey back to humanity. If they can prove they've changed, truly changed, there's a provision to reconsider. Not the money, that's gone forever. But their place in this family, their chance to honor their mother's memory, that remains possible. Phase 3 launched on Christmas Eve. I liquidated everything that wasn't in the foundation. The houses, the boats, the cars, the art collection Margaret hadn't specifically preserved for museums. The fire sale raised another $200 million. Every penny went to the foundation. On Christmas morning, my children woke to find moving trucks at their homes. Everything they'd bought with stolen money was being repossessed. Michael's Ferrari, Jennifer's jewelry, David's wine collection, all gone. They were left with exactly what they'd earned honestly, which was almost nothing. But the masterstroke came on New Year's Eve. I hosted a party at the Four Seasons, same room as Margaret's memorial dinner. I invited everyone, friends, enemies, press, even my children, who were required to attend. At midnight, as champagne flowed and the Boston elite toasted new beginnings, I announced the Margaret Hartley Winchester Foundation's first grants. $10 million to Rosa, her nurse, for a hospice care facility for immigrants. $5 million to each of the charities Margaret had supported. $1 million scholarships for underprivileged art students. And the crown jewel, the James and Margaret Winchester Center for Ethics in Business, funded with $50 million, dedicated to teaching the next generation that wealth without character is poverty of the soul. My children sat at a table in the corner, watching their inheritance transform into their mother's true legacy. Michael's wife had filed for divorce that morning. Jennifer's husband had moved out that afternoon. David's wife was staying, but only if he underwent therapy twice a week and worked at her school for 5 years. They looked broken, which was the point. Sometimes you have to shatter something completely before you can rebuild it. Thomas Brennan, my investigator, approached their table with one final folder. "Your father wanted you to have this," he said. Inside were photos of Margaret throughout her life, teaching them to read, bandaging scraped knees, attending every recital and game, crying at their graduations, birthday parties where she'd made their favorite cakes from scratch, Christmas mornings where she'd stayed up all night wrapping presents. The final photo was from her last coherent day, October 22nd, holding a picture of them as children, still hoping they'd come. Jennifer broke first, sobbing uncontrollably, her carefully applied makeup streaming down her face. David followed, his Ponzi scheme bravado crumbling like the house of cards it had always been. Even Michael, my calculating eldest, wiped his eyes. They finally understood what they'd lost. Not money, but their mother's love, which they'd traded for greed. I left the party at 12:30 a.m., driving through empty Boston streets to Mount Auburn Cemetery where Margaret lay beneath fresh snow. I'd brought champagne, her favorite, Perrier Jouet Belle Époque 1996, the year Michael graduated high school and she still had hope for him. I poured 2 glasses, leaving one on her headstone. "I did it, Maggie," I said to the cold stone that marked the end of everything good. I showed them who they really are. But I also gave them a chance to become who they could be. That's what you would have wanted. The wind whispered through the bare trees, and for a moment, I could swear I smelled lavender, her signature scent that had filled our home for 47 years. The aftermath was everything Margaret would have appreciated: poetic justice served with surgical precision. Michael took his 5-year sentence at Club Fed, minimum security in Otisville, New York, and emerged after 3 years reformed, or at least chastened. He now works as a financial crimes consultant for the FBI, using his expertise in embezzlement to catch others like him. His salary is $87,000 a year, less than he used to spend on cars. His ex-wife Patricia used her million to open a fashion boutique that employs formerly incarcerated women. She sends me a card every Christmas, thanking me for freeing her from a marriage built on lies. She's engaged now to a teacher who makes her laugh. Jennifer's fall was the most public. The SEC's investigation revealed connections to a broader insider trading ring, taking down several prominent hedge fund managers. She paid her $8 million fine by liquidating everything, including her wedding ring, a 4-carat diamond that sold for $200,000. Marcus divorced her but refused the $1 million I'd offered, saying he wanted nothing connected to the Winchester money. He's remarried now, to a kindergarten teacher who makes him smile the way Jennifer never did. Jennifer works as a compliance officer at a small credit union in Worcester, making $65,000 a year and living in a studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant. She volunteers at a financial literacy program for teenagers, teaching them about the cost of greed. She's in therapy 4 times a week, learning to feel emotions she'd suppressed since childhood. David's story took an unexpected turn. His wife Sarah stayed, but on her terms. He had to publicly apologize to every investor at a gathering I organized, work at her elementary school for 2 years teaching basic economics, and attend therapy twice a week with Dr. Morrison, who specialized in narcissistic personality disorder. Their son James, they asked permission to use my name, which I granted, was born on Margaret's birthday, April 15th. David now runs a legitimate financial advisory firm that specializes in helping seniors protect their assets from predatory family members. The irony isn't lost on anyone. He sends me quarterly reports, not because he has to, but because he wants me to see he's changed. Last month, he returned $50,000 to a client who'd overpaid, something the old David would have considered insane. The Margaret Hartley Winchester Foundation has distributed $300 million to date. Rosa's hospice has treated over 1,000 patients, all receiving the same compassionate care she gave Margaret. Rosa herself earned her nursing degree with foundation support and now runs the facility. She calls me every Sunday, the way Margaret used to, just to check in. The art scholarships have launched 17 careers, including one recipient who just had her first exhibition at the Guggenheim. The Ethics Center has become Harvard Business School's most popular program, with a waiting list 3 years long. Every student learns about the Winchester family tragedy, a cautionary tale of how wealth without wisdom destroys everything it touches. I live simply now in a 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the public garden where Margaret and I used to walk. The apartment costs $4,000 a month, less than I used to spend on wine. I kept only 3 things from our former life: Margaret's reading chair, where she spent her final good days reading Keats, our wedding photo, taken when we believed our children would be different, and the Monet sketch from that first auction, the one that brought us together. Everything else was just stuff, as Margaret always said, stuff that cluttered life instead of enriching it. My children visit monthly, court-ordered at first, voluntary now. We're rebuilding slowly, on a foundation of truth rather than pretense. Michael brings his new girlfriend, a public defender who keeps him humble and makes him volunteer at legal aid. Jennifer comes alone, working through workbooks on rebuilding trust, writing letters to Margaret's grave that she reads aloud. David brings little James, who has Margaret's eyes and hopefully, her heart. We don't talk about money anymore. We talk about Margaret, about redemption, about the possibility that broken things can be repaired, even if the cracks always show. Last week, going through Margaret's things in storage, I found a letter she'd written but never sent, dated a week before she died. My dearest James, if you're reading this, you've done what I asked, shown our children who they really are. But remember, my love, that's not the end. It's the beginning. People can change. Hearts can soften. Greed can transform into gratitude, but only after it costs everything. Be patient with them. They're still our children, even if they lost their way. The money was always just paper and promises. The real inheritance is the chance to become better. Give them that chance, after they've paid the price. I know you're angry. I know they hurt you by hurting me. But anger is just love frustrated by disappointment. Let the love win, eventually. I love you beyond death, beyond disappointment, beyond the boundaries of this world. When you're ready, when they're ready, forgive. Not for them, but for you. Carrying hatred is like holding hot coals. You're the one who burns. Forever your Maggie. P.S. Rosa has something for you. Ask her about the garden. I called Rosa immediately. She came over with a small box, crying as she handed it to me. Inside were seeds from Margaret's garden, labeled in her handwriting, "Plant these when you're ready to grow something new." This morning, on the first anniversary of Margaret's death, all 3 children met me at her grave. They brought flowers, not expensive arrangements from the florist, but wildflowers picked from their own gardens, grown from seeds I'd given them from Margaret's collection, the kind she loved. Jennifer read a poem she'd written, apologizing to the mother she'd failed. I counted dollars while you counted days. I measured worth in all the wrong ways. You offered love, I demanded gold. Now I'm rich in regret, but poor and cold. Michael played Margaret's favorite song on his phone, Etta James's at last, the one from our wedding that he'd never bothered to learn the name of before. He knew all the words now. David brought a drawing from little James, a stick figure family holding hands under a rainbow, labeled Grandma in Heaven watching us. We stood there in the November cold, finally a family again, broken and rebuilt, scarred but healing. The $73 million was gone, but something more valuable had taken its place. The knowledge that Margaret's love had survived even their betrayal, that redemption was possible even for those who'd chosen greed over grief. As we left the cemetery, David asked, "Dad, do you think Mom would forgive us?" I looked at my children, no longer the vultures from the funeral, but wounded people learning to be human again, and gave them Margaret's final gift. She forgave you before you even failed. She loved you through your greed. She just wanted you to become worthy of that love. They cried then, all 3 of them, not for the money they'd lost, but for the mother they'd found too late. And in that moment, I knew Margaret's last wish had been fulfilled. I'd shown them who they really were, but more importantly, I'd shown them who they could become. The $73,847,293.46? It's still working, funding dreams, healing wounds, creating the legacy Margaret wanted. Not a fortune passed to ungrateful heirs, but a force for good that will outlive us all. My children will never be wealthy, but they might finally be worthy. And that, as Margaret would say, is worth more than all the money in the world. Yesterday, I planted Margaret seeds in the public garden, with permission from the city. The groundskeeper, an Irish immigrant named Patrick, helped me. "These will bloom in spring," he said. "Your wife, she knew about growing things." "Yes," I said, "she did." My children were there, each holding a small shovel, each planting their own section. Little James threw dirt everywhere, laughing the way children should. Sarah took pictures. Marcus came, and even Patricia. We were a strange family, broken, reformed, scarred, but a family nonetheless. As we finished planting, Jennifer asked, "What kind of flowers will these be?" "I don't know," I admitted. Margaret didn't label them. She liked surprises. "Like this whole thing," Michael said, gesturing at our small group. "The biggest surprise of all, that we could come back from what we did." "That's not the surprise," I corrected. "The surprise is that she knew you would. She planned for it. These seeds? She saved them specifically for this moment, for when we were ready to grow something new together. David knelt down, touching the freshly turned soil. How long until they bloom? April, Patrick the groundskeeper said. Just in time for Easter. New life and all that. We stood there, the Boston skyline behind us, the garden where Margaret and I had walked for 47 years around us, the future ahead of us. The money was gone, scattered to the winds of charity and justice. But the family remained, different than before, harder-earned, more honest. That night, I had dinner with my children for the first time since Margaret's death without court orders or lawyers present. We ate at the little Italian restaurant in the North End where Margaret and I had our first date. The owner, Giuseppe, now in his 80s, remembered us. Mrs. Winchester, he said, she was a lady. A real lady. She knew the names of all my grandchildren. 8 grandchildren, Jennifer said suddenly. Maria, Tony, Lisa, Frank, Angela, Rosie, Dominic, and baby Giuseppe. Giuseppe's eyes widened. You remember. Mom made us memorize them, Michael admitted. Said people mattered more than portfolios. We didn't listen then, David added. We're listening now. We talked until the restaurant closed, not about money or inheritances or the past, but about the future. Michael's girlfriend was pregnant. Jennifer was applying to social work school. David was teaching his son to paint, the way Margaret had tried to teach him. Small steps toward redemption, toward becoming the people Margaret had hoped they'd be. As we parted, standing on the cobblestones of Hanover Street, Jennifer asked, Dad, can we come for Thanksgiving? Of course, I said. Margaret would want that. We'll cook, Michael offered. I've been learning. YouTube videos, mostly, but I can make her stuffing now. The one with the chestnuts and sage. I'll bring pie, David said. Sarah makes amazing pie. Mom would have loved her pie. And I'll bring wine, Jennifer said, then caught herself. Scratch that. I'll bring sparkling cider. We're all in recovery from something. They hugged me then, all 3 of them, the first genuine embrace since they were children. They smelled different. Michael no longer reeked of expensive cologne. Jennifer had given up her $500 perfume. David had quit smoking. They smelled like ordinary people, which is what they'd finally become. I watched them walk away into the Boston night, my 3 children who'd lost $73 million but found their souls. Margaret would have been proud. Not of who they'd been, but of who they were becoming. Back in my apartment, I opened Margaret's journal to the last entry, dated November 17th, the day before she died. James will think he's punishing them, but he's saving them. From themselves, from the poison of unearned wealth, from becoming the hollow people we've seen destroy themselves with privilege. Let them fall. Let them shatter. Then help them rebuild. The money means nothing. The lesson means everything. My legacy isn't millions in a bank. It's the possibility that our children might finally understand what we tried to teach them at that dinner table so many years ago, that money is just paper, but family is forever. All my love, always, Margaret. P.S. Tell them I loved them. Even at their worst, I loved them. That's what mothers do. I closed the journal and looked out at the public garden, where somewhere beneath the snow, Margaret's seeds were waiting for spring. Just like my children, dormant but not dead, broken but not beyond repair, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. The $73 million was the price of their education. Their souls were the dividend. Margaret always did know how to invest for the long term. Thank you for listening to today's story of justice served ice cold. Look at your screen right now. The left video shows another family betrayal exposed. The right video reveals a $50 million revenge. Both will restore your faith in karma. Hit the notification bell. Tomorrow's story will shock you even more. Remember, respect your elders, or become the next cautionary tale.